Hey guys, started to make this video a while back and actually started to make it a couple times, never got around to uploading it. Um, just really wrestled with the idea whether or not this was the content or the subject that I wanted to present on this channel for lots of reasons. I mean, number one, this channel is primarily devoted to the civilian use of combatives, and there is a difference between how the military uses it and how a civilian would. We've talked about that. Uh, but also, I've debated it because, well, honestly, the same reason that I debated it, ever even putting this channel out for years. Just debated on how deep I wanted to get into as far as topic and background and things like that. Um, a couple years back, I did a project with a guy, and we were working in a country that I had not previously worked in. Prior to that, a lot of my work had been in the Middle East, and I had not worked in this particular country. But it was an austere environment, and there was, you know, unfriendly individuals, things like this. I mean, the typical kind of things that you work with when you're working in third world countries. And it was the first time I was working operationally in a leadership role. And as I'm going through and I'm kind of outlining the plan for my team to the operations manager, we were in communication, and this individual was just he was just a wealth of knowledge. Really took his time and mentored me. Gave me a lot of insight, just really kind of tutored me in the process, all the way from just a low-level security guy up to a leadership position. And I remember as I'm outlining my plan to him, he asked me a simple question that really has had profound impacts ever since. And that question was, do you think or do you know? And I realized at that moment when he said that, I had to kind of pause and think. And I realized that I had been making certain assumptions based on the previous countries and environments that I had worked in. But those assumptions, if they were not correct for the particular environment I was then currently working in, it it could have some potentially mission critical effects there. I mean, it could have brought things down, at least on my side of the house. And it was one of those situations, kind of like when something just clicks and it just makes sense. I mean, you've heard it 100 times before, you know it, you drill it, you practice it, but then one day it just makes sense and it becomes real to you. And I had that moment when I was in country at that time, and it really just sort of clicked and made sense. And I was like, yeah, you know, that could seriously go bad. As it turns out, the assumptions that I was making, I did have to go back and I did have to re-verify them, and they were correct. But it was a situation where I had gotten lucky. It wasn't a situation where I had outsmarted things, I had thought things completely through. It was a situation where I had made assumptions, and luckily I was correct, and it worked out. It was fine. Um, but he had recognized that there were certain assumptions that were being made, and had called me to the table on it, prior to the mission kicking off, and had forced me to kind of go back to the drawing board and re-verify things. Um, but I think about that in the context of, really just in the context of everything. Even in day-to-day life, I ask myself, do you think or do you know? in the world of combatives in self-defense, we see certain techniques or positions, or however you want to refer to them. We see these things maybe on on the internet, or we see an instructor do these things, and we're like, yeah, I got that. And this is basically just mental assent. I get it, but I haven't actually done it yet. The next step is that I take those things and maybe I practice these things on a willing partner, just so that I can commit those things to somewhat of a body memory type thing, a mental note, where I can start to gain confidence in that. But still, I don't yet have it until I'm able to actually do it under stress. And that's where some of the force on force training comes in and stuff like that, is we create environments where you can actually do those things and gain full knowledge and confidence in those techniques. But it's not just a matter of mastering those particular techniques or just relevant in the world of combatives, because those same principles can be applied to what I see going on a lot now with like this whole prepper thing that a lot of people have gotten into. Viking preparedness, the PJF over there had made a video, I don't know, quite some time ago, and he had talked about basically going out and verifying your equipment, testing your gear, working things out, not just throwing stuff in your bag and you're like, yeah, I got a 3-day pack, but do you actually know that it's a 3-day pack? Do you think you can survive for 3 days on that, or do you know you can survive? And really the only way that you can know is to go out and test it. You can't really go on the go on whether or not somebody else has actually done this. You have to actually go out and verify it yourself, based on your environment. Do you have enough water? Is water prevalent in your area? Is that necessarily a great concern for you? If you're in the Central Florida area, water is really not an issue because it's usually no more than 12 inches to 24 inches below ground, but purifying it can become an issue. Versus if you're in the Nevada desert somewhere and now water becomes a massive issue. So how you outfit your 3-day pack and things like that really becomes somewhat individualistic, where just like in the world of combatives, you can't just watch somebody else do something and say, okay, I've got that, or yes, I've got all the same things, I've got the best Gucci gear that money can buy. You have to actually get out there and test it. By the same token, I see this a lot. I worked on a project here in the United States where I was actually training some security and some law enforcement guys in small unit tactics, because that's not something that they really focus on that much. And as a result, one of the things that we did was, we actually bring out, airsoft and things like this to create environments as close to being realistic as possible, to give them the opportunity to actually be able to validate and to test their techniques and to gain confidence in how they maneuver and they react to contact and stuff like this. It's not that the airsoft really has any great effect, but what it does is it adds a level of realism to what would otherwise just be, random guys just randomly moving around a field together. So you end up taking these skills and you incorporate them all together, and once again, we could have gone out and just practiced guys performing react to contact from a file, from a line, peels and pivots and things like this. I mean, we could have done all of this just in a classroom. We could have done this in an open field. But when you add a level of force on force to it, you're committing those things to that level of not just thinking but also knowing. And I see this a lot just in everything. When you have mission critical elements that are out there, and these are things that could potentially be damning for whether it be your survival or your business. These are things that we intuitively know in our day-to-day life that we need to check this, we need to validate this. I need to make sure before I go to bed at night, do I have gas in the car, so that I know if I have to get up 30 minutes earlier to go and fill up my tank, or just whatever. If I'm on a time schedule, these are all things that we do to kind of prepare. But for some reason, when we get into a combatives or a self-defense or even a prepper mentality, it becomes a fad, a Gucci moment, where we have a tendency to just buy up all the gear as if money is going to buy those skills and those abilities. But we never actually test anything. We never actually make sure that 3-day bag lasts 3 days. We never actually make sure that I can draw under stress. We never actually make sure that when I put together a mutual assistance group, that we go out and actually train together, actually react to things. And there's a lot of places right now that are doing these things, but there's actually more people who want to spend time saying that they're prepping than there are people who are actually prepping. It's almost like there's a fad out there of this doom and gloom type way of thinking, where it's become trendy and it's become fashionable to prepare, but nobody actually wants to do what it takes to prepare. It becomes trendy and fashionable to say that you do jiu-jitsu, but nobody actually wants to do jiu-jitsu or do combatives or whatever. And I realize that this is probably always going to be an issue. There's always going to be people who just lack that intestinal fortitude to push on and to drive on until you've reached a level of mastery. It's really just kind of a byproduct of our culture today, and the entire participation award type culture that we live in, where people sign up and they take a class, and then they come out of that class and they get a certificate, and they're like, yeah, I did this class, I did that. If there's no level of failure, if there's no percentage of failure, if there's no opportunity for failure, then you really didn't do anything short of a participation award. And I'm not trying to diminish the ability or the time that people put into training, but you have to be honest with yourself. If you started off with a class of 20 guys and all 20 guys made it, and even you being honest, you see that probably 5 of those guys had no business getting any sort of certificate, then you have to ask yourself, how much value is my certificate? How much value is there in the certificate that I received? And therefore, do I think I can do these things in the class, or do I know? And this comes down to, in my opinion, intellectual honesty with instructors and with a lot of the schools that are going on nowadays, where people are, it's become a business, quite honestly. you know, there, when I first started doing contract work, there was a term that came out, and they told me that, you know, you really got to get this down. It was this term, networking. And it's the idea that basically you're going to build friends and relationships with individuals because these will render um, opportunities with jobs and projects. And I have seen that. I mean, a lot of the contracting world is a good old boy network. It's about who you know, who can kind of help you get in the door. I get that. I understand that. But it's also, in my opinion, it's a somewhat intellectually dishonest and disingenuous approach to it, because I'm just not wired that way. I'm not a salesman. Um, I try and speak as honestly and truly to a particular subject, and I'll offer my opinion if I'm asked for it, but um, I'm not really that guy that is going to build up some sort of false relationship just for the sake of it rendering some sort of tangible financial benefit. But unfortunately, a lot of the teaching that is going on nowadays is really based on that. It's based on the participation award approach. Even though a lot of these guys who are teaching these courses, they know how invalid that is. They themselves have participated in courses with, you know, 70-80% failure rates. But then they will teach a class, and, you know, every single class is 100% success. And in my opinion, that somewhat invalidates that certificate. It somewhat invalidates that individual's success. It's basically, it's a participation award. It doesn't mean anything. There has to be a level of failure, or at least an opportunity of failure, in order for something to have value. And I say that to say, and this is how this all kind of ties in, is there's a lot of people wanting to prep. There's a lot of people wanting to train. There's a lot of people wanting to do these things, but they don't want the failure. So they're willing to settle on the idea that I think I can, and never ever wanting to reach that level of I know I can. They're perfectly content to just sit in a level of ignorance and say, you know, I think, I don't know. And that's a dangerous place to be, in my opinion, particularly for guys who are looking at self-defense or who are looking at prepping, because the magnitude of the claim demands a response. If you're responsible for your own life or the life of someone else, that's a pretty massive, the magnitude of that claim demands a response. You can't just sit on the fence and say, well, I think. If you just think, then you've already got the answer. You don't know. You have no level of confidence. You have no reason to have any level of assurance. But to continue to train and to push on and to run the risk of that failure and to fail and constantly get up, you know, I mean, you've never failed until you quit, unless you just never even try. So one of my favorite expressions is a comedian named Ron White, and I kind of use this on guys at times or whatever. But Ron White says, you know, he's talking about a circumstance, and he's like, man, that boy's got a lot of quit in him. And I see that a lot. I see that with a lot of people who won't take the chance on failure, who won't take the chance on losing. They're perfectly content to sit in a state of ignorance. And quite honestly, if everything goes the way that a lot of these preppers are predicting and the bottom drops out, you're not just costing you, you're costing your family. If you're in a parking lot and you get mugged, you're not just costing you, you're costing your family. The magnitude of the claim demands a response. You need to make sure that you don't just think. You need to make sure you know. So, anyway, that was something that I wanted to share.